I'm Paul and I'm here with Matthew. We're both professional tour guides who have adapted to leading visitors to a very different York in 2020, and we've decided to create a pandemic diary of our city.
So, in the hours leading up to Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister's historic announcement of a second lockdown this weekend, we've come out into the city to ask people their views, comments and opinions on the pandemic.
We just wanted to see some of the history, go inside the church we've just done, which was incredible, and just, I guess, walk around, absorb the atmosphere in the rain.
We got up this morning because we booked a holiday in Cromer, so we were all packed up to go to Cromer. Saw the headlines.
Yeah, then it could be locked down, and we're in tier 3 as from Monday, so we're just coming for the day today.
We know York, we've been many times.
So what made you change your plans this morning there? Because you knew you were already going into tier 3 on Monday, right?
Yeah.
Was it this possible lockdown?
Yeah, it's the possibility of lockdown.
How come you chose York today?
Mum and Dad came a couple of months ago for their renovation, so it was amazing. So we thought we'd try it out, and it is. I just thought I'd do a little bit of Christmas shopping before they lock us down. so yeah, I've been having a little look round.
Did you find anything interesting?
I did actually, to be honest with you. I like to support independent people, so there was a little guy on the market from Skipton and I bought a few bits and pieces from him.
I think it's different when you're in a city centre or a town centre, because we've had a mixed response. That some people acknowledge that there is an issue and respect social distancing, whereas other people of all ages just completely ignore the situation.
How do you feel about obviously we're in what could be the last weekend before a nationwide lockdown? How do you feel about going into a pub and having a pint?
Well, we're probably outside. We'll try to go outside and sit outside. But just looking in the hotel bar, it's quite quiet tonight.
Yeah.
But it's Halloween today, isn't it? So I think York itself will we've seen lots of people walking around in costumes already, so I think it might be a bit rowdy.
And how is York comparing to other places that you've been during the pandemic?
It's
What's your
busy.
experience?
Yeah, I would say it's a pretty busy place, Sweden anyway.
How is the social distancing throughout the city, and how are people conforming? It's not really working.
To be honest with you, I think it's still quite busy, considering what's going on, but I think people just get to the point where you think you've got to learn to live with it, make the most of it, and just class it as a normal.
I feel like not many people take it seriously, but I don't think that's necessarily like the city's fault. I think that's more of just like an attitude problem amongst people.
Did you notice a difference in attitude in different ages, like among friends and family?
Yeah, so I think the older people, ironically, even though they are the most at risk, I think they were the ones that like kind of were taking it not very seriously, if you know what I mean.
Generally speaking, I think people are being observant of social distancing. We walked down through a little small alleyway and a family of 5 stepped to one side and we stepped away. However, at the same time, a lady who I would put in maybe her later years just completely ignored. She had no mask on and she completely ignored the fact that we just stepped aside and observed social distancing and just completely marched through.
I think a lot of the precautions that places are taking are largely arbitrary, and it makes very, very little difference if you're wearing a mask to get up in a pub if you're then just sitting down next to strangers. That said, I'm going to pubs, I'm going to restaurants, I'm aware of the risks, and I think you've got to just make your own risk assessment about these things. So I think that a lot of the precautions are arbitrary, and if you really want to stop it happening, you've got to do the lockdown as much as I don't want to do it.
So what do you think about the possibility that they're saying that, maybe early next week we'll go into a second lockdown, close it down?
We don't love lockdown, but I feel like we just got to get on with it. We've been seeing stuff, carrying on, just obeying the rules, but getting out.
They're thinking about keeping schools and colleges open whilst everything else is locked down. What do you think about that?
I'm actually in college, I go to York College here.
Yeah.
And they're trying to social distance, but it really is impossible because you can't social distance a college of students. You can't social distance at university.
Yeah.
So like you can keep them open, but it will not change.
And what are your thoughts about the announcement that there's potentially going to be another lockdown starting next week, for up to
Well,
maybe a
I
month?
fear for the economy, I fear for people who are self-employed, and I fear for people's jobs. I think things are going to get very hard.
The second lockdown has been announced for 4 days' time, and you've come into the city 4 days before. What are you doing in the city today?
Well, we just come for a day out.
Yeah. I think people are panicking, and I think they want a Christmas and they want to see their families. And so I think people may well be doing some Christmas shopping today.
My understanding is that all the restaurants and pubs are going to close, which is pretty bad, and I don't think they're going to be reopening before Christmas. I know it said it's going to be a month, but from my perspective, I think they're closing, and a lot of places I don't think will open back up, sadly.
But I think the benefit of starting the lockdown now, potentially being able to reopen for Christmas, it's more beneficial because there'll be more people spending money over Christmas anyway, and if we can sort of nip it in the bud now, reopen for Christmas time, it'll work out rather than leaving it any longer and potentially being in lockdown over Christmas.
I think will help people's mental health purely because of that isolation and not having that kind of communication where you can speak to somebody. And I've seen that firsthand. My son, he suffers really bad with mental health because he was in the forces, and obviously he's at university, so it's impacted him completely because his outlook was he's gone to university, he's gone to lectures, now it's all online, so he's back in the house environment.
See, I don't really think about catching the virus when I come out. And I wear a mask and I do what I'm told, but I just try and get on and not think about it. I just think you wouldn't be scared to go anywhere if you really thought about it. So just try and be as normal as possible.
How safe do you feel in walking around the city given the number of cases?
We're not really at high risk anyway, so even if we get it, it's whatever.
Yeah, I've been exposed and friends have been exposed to people who've been infected and they didn't get it.
Yeah.
I didn't get it, so I'm just a bit like, if it happens and I get it, it happens. If not, then
Yeah.
not. Yeah. So I've kind of been
Not really scared about it, to be honest.
Nice.
It's more of an inconvenience
than anything else.
I'm frightened of COVID-19. I'm frightened of my parents contracting it. I'm frightened of Patrick's family contracting it, and so we don't do much socialising. However, I guess by coming into York, we are exposing ourselves to potentially picking it up. So,
Is there anything that you've learnt, or rather, have you been surprised by human nature and people's reactions to the pandemic, i.e. what it's brought out in people's personalities?
I think a lot of anxiety with regards to me. I've got 4 boys and I've got grandchildren, and I think the worst for me was not to have that kind of communication with my grandkids because they're too young to understand it. So obviously they weren't laid in the house, but they could come to my door and try to tell a 3-year-old you can't cuddle Nana. That's been the worst for me.
we've got to get rid of this situation. We've got to all come together and acknowledge that it's a serious, it's a serious long-term issue for the world, never mind this country.
And have you got plans for Halloween?
Do we?
Have you anything planned for Halloween?
No, I'm a goth, so I just dress like this every day.
Oh, I see. Right, okay. 365 days a year.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it was actually voted most haunted city in Europe by National Geographic a few years ago. I don't know if it's still considered, but it's certainly one of the top most haunted in Europe.
This year it's a little less scary though, because the ghosts tend to be haunting people from 1 metre away, 2 metres where possible.
They're very considerate ghosts.
Yeah.